So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay on a map I don't know the name of but have seen before, but we'll go through the map as we go through what I can see of the army compositions. Now I am not in this one, which I'm very glad for after someone jumped down my throat in the comments of the last one saying that I sucked. But lesson very much learned. We will be having a look today at one sent to me by Mia Eel, who the last one he sent me was actually very enjoyable, so I look forward to this one, particularly on this map, because I have seen it before, as I've said, but I've never actually seen anyone play on it, nor have I played on it myself before. But he is, of course, playing as the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm. Of course, we've got these 3rd Legion men here in... Oh, was I back into the tree? In a column formation. They do not have their armour upgrade, but they're still a very, very solid, very tough to break down unit, even without their armour upgrades, as most Dwarves tend to be. Fewer men in the unit, though, than equivalent units can have. Got some Orc Hunters here. Now, we are quite far away from the site where the action will begin, so there might be a little bit of a cut as what I believe to be the attackers in this situation, which are going to be the Dwarves and the Elves, move in on whoever is defending the settlement up in the top left-hand corner. But the Dwarves here, we also do have some 4th Legion as we get in here to see them, and they do have the armour upgrade, which is an interesting choice, so they are going to be even tougher. Obviously, to compensate for this, we do have some of the slightly lower tier units that Khazad-dûm can bring. Of course, though, stuff like the Sentries and the Warriors of Khazad-dûm are still going to be very, very tough and able to defeat their equivalents from most other factions in a straight fight. We also have a unit of the Mithril Guard over here. I cannot see the general in this unit, so they will be able to be used a little bit more freely. Of course, they are AP, despite having shields as well, so that is a nice bit of utility they have. We've got some 2nd Legion here, again in column formation. They don't really need to set out right away, because of course they can move. They do have a choice of how to attack, though, between a narrow pathway and then sort of a slightly wider one. And here we have some 2nd Legion, of course, with the armour upgrade, so again, slightly tougher, very dangerous on the attack. As we have a look over here, we do have some Legion Bodyguard. Is this where the General's hiding? Yes, you can see Balin is in here, so the Legion Bodyguard will be where the Dwarven General is going to be housed, and that's pretty much it. The rest is just going to be more standard warrior units and a unit of Sons of the Fallen. So all in all, a pretty decent Dwarven unit, but then these are the attackers, so they will have access to a little bit more in terms of funds, I believe. But yeah, obviously going to be very, very solid, adding the real muscle to the front line. And adding the skill, we shall have Carl Dragonborn. Now, I'm not sure how much of this army I'm going to be able to see, because it is Mirkwood, so there are bound to be hidden units all over the place. We have some Megil E. Erin here at the front. Skill-based infantry should complement stuff like the 3rd Legion very nicely if it turns into a very grindy fight. We shall see. More spears as well, the Thrandrami Erin. Skillful elven spears are always a little bit tougher to break down in many cases, because while they won't kill things particularly quickly with that infantry combat malice, they will still sort of stay standing quite a long time because of that heightened skill bonus. We've got some Thurny Tower, of course, hidden all along the front line. They've deployed their stakes, but the attackers are going to be moving forward relatively quickly anyway, I would imagine. We've got some Mitha Ilaz Gelen, which are a pretty important tool for Mirkwood most of the time, because they are spears crossed with pretty deadly javelins. They can be used to help zone out enemy cavalry, so often they form a pretty rigid part of the Mirkwood defence, but of course they will be attacking in this situation. We've got some Hir-e Peng as well as some Hir-e Ek and some Hir-e Auth, and I think we have the Lang as well, so yeah, the full complement of the slightly more sturdy Mirkwood frontline infantry, which in a situation where Mirkwood is attacking is not particularly surprising, because you can't really avoid a grind forever in a situation like this, I don't think, so you know, definitely a wiser choice to go for their slightly more heavy-duty infantry. All of the cavalry is going to be taken care of by the Mirkwood player, which again is probably the wiser choice. All of it is basically going to be spear cavalry, and also it's going to be quite swift, and then the Dwarves can really focus in on infantry to really provide that muscle at the front. So we've got some Ira Brannon E. Nanwaith here, which indeed is the General's Bodyguard unit, obviously multiple HP spear cavalry. Not as expensive as Knights or multiple HP Lancers, I believe, but they are still quite vulnerable with that lack of a shield and overall lack of armour despite having 2 HP. Some Roykabin, Amon Lang as well, so again more spear cavalry, and that's going to be pretty much it. So based on what I can see, he hasn't brought any horse archers, which in this situation is probably a good thing, because as we move towards the defender's position as we sort of go through this open ground, which it's unlikely the battle will take place here, you can see that it is more or less a choke point. You can see that there is the coastline over there, but this is where I think the first battle is probably going to take place, or a little bit closer to the settlement as we approach. You can see the buildings just in the distance with that slightly easterling architecture from Vanilla Medieval 2. And we can see that Umbar are defending, so that's quite thematic, but again, we probably won't be able to see all of their army, just because a lot of it is going to be hidden behind the canyons. So we have Law Cloud Pyro, who is going to be playing as Umbar. Pretty good choice on the defense like this because they are very sturdy, and a lot of their higher tier units do have that locked morale as well, which is really going to help them in the face of a threat like the Elves. Now the Númenórean Lancers could potentially do a lot of damage to the Elves if they get a nice charge off. They do need to steer clear of that Mirkwood Spear Cavalry, otherwise they will be in a lot of trouble. Something that doesn't, however, well, this certainly does, the Mercenary Crossbowmen, provided they can keep out of range of the Elven Archers, they should do quite well for themselves. But again, going for the slightly more mobile approach, I assume he wants to sort of sally out and try and harass Mirkwood on the approach, but that could be dangerous because these Mirkwood Crossbowmen will fall like flies underneath sustained Mirkwood arrow fire, and doubtless Mirkwood has brought quite a lot of them. Mercenary Cavalry is a very good choice, however, very dependable, and they should be able to gain cost efficiency off the Mirkwood Spear Cavalry, provided they're backed up. So it will be an interesting sort of tussle that to see who gets the best of that in terms of cost efficiency. Back here we can see our Pharazon the Golden is going to be within the Naruna Aru Royal Guard, probably the safest place for him, to be honest with you, in this kind of situation. A heavy spearman archer hybrid, which is of course multiple HP, very similar to the Hearthguard of Amon-Sul from Cardland now, that the Royal Guard and the Royal Archers were combined into one unit recently for Umbar. So a very strong unit indeed, and they should be a real boon for Umbar if they're still alive in the late game. We've also got some Abrazani Nadubawi, who it's interesting actually to see them without the armour upgrade, but they are still a very, very durable arch unit indeed. Alongside the Bardian Marksman, they are probably the single most sort of armour-focused archer in the game. It would be fair to say, particularly when you upgrade the armour of both of those two units, they are real strongmen of the archer world. The Balagar archers, however, probably the all-around more popular choice because they are cheaper and they still offer that kind of skirmish warfare for you, and of course, you know, generally speaking, that is how Umbar likes to get their skirmishing done. And we also have some Corsair archers as well, just to add more numbers, so a lot of skirmish power over here, which is presumably to try and match up against Mirkwood. Otherwise Mirkwood would try and smoke out the defenders, which is definitely not what they want. We do have some armour upgraded Corsair infantry back here, which, you know, should be able to absorb quite a bit of fire, but they won't stand a chance of 1-to-1 with Elven infantry, so they do need to be careful. But of course, this is not the entire Umbar army. There's a lot of Umbar infantry up here, actually, densely packed units of Belagaya footmen, and then just in behind them we have the armour-piercing Abrazani Nadu Tariq and another unit of Abrazani Nadu Bawi. Now it'll be interesting to see how those AP units are deployed. Of course, you have the settlement which leads back here, the higher ground, the fallback point for the defenders. But as we can see, there is another way into this settlement, potentially over here through this very narrow canyon. But interestingly enough, we have the entire Runic army sort of deployed up against this cliff over here, played by Theodore.Delta. And he's got some Flagrim, of course, and some Gamprim, so he's probably going to want to be the one to go up against the Dwarves, if anything, with all of this AP, particularly with something like the Easterron crossbows. The Variag mercenaries as well will be able to skirmish very efficiently with the Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm. Dragon's Wrath crossbowman is a bold pick, but potentially if they're still alive in the late game, that could really swing the battle into the defenders' favour. We've also got several units of Narim over here for more skirmish power. The defenders are really keen on not being smoked out by the Elven skirmish superiority. A couple more units of Flagrim. We've got a unit of Carmel's chosen as well, and then the one unit of Knights that we're going to see on the field today is going to be Rune's General's Bodyguard, and that is the Cummel's Dragon Knights. And they will be able to take on all comers in this fight, actually, so it'll be interesting to see how they are used. But I will make a little cut because obviously the attackers are going to have to manoeuvre for a little bit, or if Umbar sallies out, then I shall rejoin you at that point. Well, this could go disastrously already for Umbar, because they've got their mercenary crossbowmen coming in, and all of the Mirkwood cavalry is bearing down upon them. They need to get out of there. Their reload speed is not great, and as soon as they get engaged in melee by these Abranoni Nanwe, they are going to drop like flies. It looks like they're going to get out of there. They did get a volley off as well, killing a couple of the Nanwe, and it's a shame actually that the Umbar archers weren't following in behind, because there was a good opportunity there actually to get some really nice suppressing fire down on the Mirkwood cavalry as it advances, and that's basically its kryptonite. It does really well in a sustained fight with the high skill and the anti-cav bonus, but against missiles, particularly the only 1 HP Roykabin Amon Lank, it does very badly. And then you could have followed through with the Merc cavalry, but all in all, not a terrible engagement actually for the Umbar player, just letting Mirkwood know that they can't just take all of the time in the world to advance, although I wouldn't try that again, because now the full Mirkwood army is going to be backing up their cavalry, and that will of course mean that Mirkwood skirmishers are going to be here. Now Khazad-dûm do actually need to probably move forward and assist Mirkwood with all possible dispatch here, because otherwise Mirkwood could find themselves coming up against a brick wall in the shape of Umbar and Rune. And Umbar and Rune are two factions which complement each other very nicely. Both of them bring pretty decent numbers to the field potentially, but also Umbar's solid defensive nature and then the additional AP that Rune can usually bring to the table, as well as some more specialty units, can make them quite the potent combination. So Mirkwood do need to be careful. They don't need to they don't want to overextend here. They definitely don't want to go out too quickly. Now this is a little bit of a mistake from Umbar, as they come in here, and you can see how quickly the mercenary crossbows drop. They don't have shields. Their armor value is not terrible, but they'll still drop like flies to basically any archer, and this is really why the mercenary crossbowmen aren't picked too often, simply because they're so easy to focus down, and their range is not fantastic, and their reload time is still pretty substantial. I mean, their crossbows, potentially the damage they can do is substantial. I mean, you can see that there are quite a few of these corpses that are littering the battlefield over here are actually elven steeds. But you can see there that the mercenary crossbowmen fared really badly after only just a couple of sort of pot-shot volleys really from the Thurney Tower. The elves, of course, with that heightened accuracy, going to be able to reap a more deadly toll than anyone else. And it is also interesting that the Carmel's Dragon Knights are over here now as well. So this is a very potent cavalry force. I mean, they don't want to go charging into the Mirkwood line. It might be tempting to, but two of these units are Merc cavalry, so the charges wouldn't be too devastating. And also Mirkwood do have quite a lot of spears in their line. And there's quite a lot of value wrapped up in both defensive armies over here. It's a pretty big cavalry force, all things considered. But it looks as though Mirkwood is not going to be too eager to charge forward. And in fact, you can see over here, Carmel's Dragon Knight's actually under fire from the Thurney Tower, so that's some good range there from the elves, using that slight bit of elevation. Nice angle of fire, so they're just going to need to pull back a little bit here. The defenders, they do, I think, need to use their terrain to their advantage, because skirmishing with the Thurney Tower, the Umbar skirmish line is going to have a field day with that. The Thurney Tower are decent, but against all of these Umbar archers, their overall lack of armour will hurt them. But this Merc cavalry is charging right on in. Actually, it's the Megal E Erin that came to block the charge. That's an interesting choice, because they weren't the spears, but I guess you have to make do with what you were given in a particular part of your line. But once again, you can see the Elven archers firing volleys off. Now this is potentially a mistake. If they're going to commit their cavalry here, they need to commit all of their cavalry, in my opinion, and they're leaving way too much of it at home. The runic player is going to charge in, and they are going to get a nice charge here by the looks of things onto the Hirti Lang. But you don't want to trade your very expensive units of knights for doing damage to this unit of Elven swordsmen. I mean, it's a good amount of damage, but as soon as they turn around, the shield bonus is going to be negated, and you can see back there another unit of Thurney Tower and the Hirti Peng ready to capitalise. You can see the other unit of mercenary cavalry is shaken. Obviously the Mercs are not the finest when it comes to their morale, and they are going to pay the iron price here, I think. There's nowhere really for them to retreat to other than back to the settlement, but yeah, they're wavering. They're going to fall in the face of those Elven arrows. The Dragon Knights won't, but you can see the Dragon Knights under sustained fire from several units of Elven archers. It's not going well for them, and only now actually is the Elven cavalry on scene. I would have expected to see that a little bit sooner. I mean, the Carmel's Dragon Knights are intimidating, but definitely not when they've taken this level of casualties, and they're actually routing. This might be an opportunity actually to silence them for good, because they won't come back if they take too many casualties, and indeed they're charging through the Hirti Lung, so yeah, some pretty substantial missteps there from the defenders. And that is a shame, because that cavalry force could have been something that they could save for the late game, especially when the elves are out of ammunition with most of their skirmishers. A unit of Carmel's Dragon Knights marauding around would have been a nightmare for them. Using your cavalry defensively would have presented fewer opportunities to get the Elven cavalry a place in the field. But now you can see the Elven Spear cavalry is not really going to fear much of anything they've got left. I mean, the Merc cavalry is good, obviously, but there is only one unit of them, and it is the most basic unit of melee cavalry you could ever wish to have. There are some more Nar Rim coming over here now. Interestingly enough, the dwarves are going to move up to support Mirkwood directly in this sort of frontal area over here, rather than going through the narrow canyon, at least for the time being. They may well double back. But I do like how game the defenders are being here, because they are making a concerted effort to meet the attackers in somewhat more even ground. Although I would definitely say you really want to be making use of this terrain that you've been given here. This Merc cavalry has sort of again wandered a little bit too close to the sun. I mean, these Elven archers so far have definitely more than paid for themselves. Because again, this Merc Cavalry, decent armour and shields, but as soon as you turn your back, the shield value does not apply. It's to the front and to the left, I think, that the shield value applies. But yeah, this Merc Cavalry, it's definitely not going to be sufficient. And now, the defenders need to be careful here because they're getting their Nar Rim further away from the line. 2 units of Nar Rim is not going to be enough to take on the full might of Mirkwood's skirmish line. And you can see that the dwarves are going to be cresting the hills soon as well. And they will offer the real meat in the infantry line. But the Nar Rim are now in range, so they will be returning fire, and they do have the first volley, which is very important in a skirmish match. Now the Corsair archers are moving forward. This is a dense congregation of archers, which the Elven cavalry will probably be pretty reluctant to charge into this, because they will take huge casualties on the approach, on the Roykabin unit at the very least. So let's see how well the Elven skirmishers are dealing with this. Of course, this is how Mirkwood would probably want to approach a situation like this, trying to skirmish, but I don't know if they've got the numbers to keep doing this forever. It might be worth it for the defenders to push forward even more of their archers at this point, in fact. If they want to go this route, what may end up being the bane of the defenders here is that they're only sort of partially committing individual sections, when if they committed more, if they were a little bit more bold, they could maybe be doing a lot more damage than they are to the Elven lines. 30 Tower only taking minimal casualties so far, whereas the Corsair archers are taking huge amounts of damage. The unit of Hethel E Tower over here as well. Now the Merc crossbows are coming over here, but again they're just immediately being targeted by the Hiri Pang. Is it the Hiri Pang? Well, it doesn't matter because they're about to be caught and they're routing, so it doesn't matter at all. The Hethel E Tower revealed themselves as well, the dual axe units. What do we see over there? Sentries of Khazad-dûm, Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm. So we can now see the dwarves starting to filter in. I do hope they use the slightly narrower pathway at some point in the battle, but regardless of what they choose to do, the attackers are certainly off to the better start here. Now the Variag mercenaries are coming forward, which honestly would have been the unit I would have committed forward first and foremost. They are, in terms of rune skirmishers, definitely the ones which specialise in absorbing arrow fire a little bit more. The Nar Rim, of course, are without a shield, a little bit more damage focused. Not really the biggest fans of attrition-based warfare, but I do also worry about how skirmish-heavy the defenders have gone. I mean, they've got a lot of these Balagai footmen at the front, but they are going to get absolutely mashed by the Dwarven infantry one-to-one, and the Elven infantry as well will do heavy amounts of damage, but of course, when you're facing the Elves, it's never one-to-one, really. There's also that 4th Legion moving forward first, which is, honestly, with the nullification of that defensive cavalry, the spears can be used as a first line in now to absorb a bit of arrow fire, especially with that armour upgrade they've got. Still, just a bit of a skirmish going on here. Corsair archers firing in, but again, Corsair archers much more wildly inaccurate than the Elven arrows that have been flying towards them thus far. Now the 30 Tower are hiding, so the Elves content to wait for the time being. Very good start to this game for the Elves, but again, nothing's set in stone yet. When you're the defenders, if you're sort of sending out marauding units of cavalry, that's never really where the game's going to be won or lost. That is a lot of money that they sunk into those Dragon Knights and lost it. But we shall see. Over by the coast we can see the Roykabin swinging out wide. They need to hope they don't get targeted, because there is one cavalry unit in the game which is vulnerable to basically any archer. It's going to be this. They are going to charge in, I think, though, into the Merc cavalry. One-to-one, I'd be interested to see how this would go. I think the Roykabin should win it pretty handily. Oh yeah, especially when there's arrows coming across here, but a lot of that's going to be friendly fire from the defenders. Having said that, the Roykabin will be falling to this arrow fire as well, and there is substantially fewer of them than the Merc cavalry. That charge did a lot of damage. But I'm not sure I would have actually disengaged the Roykabin there. And now they're charging towards the archers, so the Merc cavalry is just going to be able to surround them after a couple more volleys. This is going to be the end for the Roykabin. This will be where they fall apart. I'd be extremely surprised if they weren't damaged to the point where they broke. And they're already shaken. I mean, they're right in the hornet's nest. There's archer units all around them firing into them. They caused a little bit of chaos, but honestly don't really think it's worth it. The Merc cavalry is only going to be useful in this fight now for shutting down the cavalry, and that's exactly what the Mirkwood player allowed Umbar to do there. And Rune with those archers. The Númenórean Lancers are still alive. I mean, at this point I would have suggested to send the Númenórean Lancers around the back through the canyon. Try and circumvent the situation, then leave them in the trees behind the attackers, and then just wait. I mean, amazingly enough, this unit is still there. They're fighting to the death, but they're going to go. But actually, this is where all of the defensive archers are somewhat distracted. That would have been a good opportunity to move up the attacking infantry as well. Númenórean Lancers just cautiously pacing around. Their opportunities to be effective in this game are probably going to be pretty key for the defenders at this point, because none of the defensive cavalry other than this Merc cavalry has really done its job at this point. This Merc cavalry managing to help shut down one of the Mirkwood spear cavalry units. But the Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm are now in range. Another pretty high quality archer, honestly, but another one which doesn't really do too well under the sustained pressure of several enemy archer units, which is probably where this is going to be going as time goes on. The dwarves are starting to send forward some infantry units though, hugging the canyon wall. That's interesting. The defenders are probably going to have to pull their skirmishers back behind their infantry line at some point, which you can see it in the background over there. There's Belagaya footmen backed up by Flag Rim. The mass of the spears and the AP of that runic infantry is not going to be the nicest proposition for the Dwarven infantry, but it shouldn't fall apart at the very least. They should be able to hold their own against these skirmishers on the approach anyway. The Variag mercenary is definitely more focused around absorbing arrow fire rather than extremely high missile damage numbers. Very much a unit which has a lot in common with the Belagaya archers that they are fighting alongside today. But the dwarves are going to be the ones to sort of kick the infantry fight off here. It isn't an overly long battle either at 22,000 frames, especially not for a battle which could have potentially gone right back into the settlement, but I imagine based on how the defenders are set up that they are really going to be putting a lot of emphasis on their first defence here rather than trying to pull back. Because they can't really afford to lose all of these units in a rearguard action and expect to win the battle as it goes on. That Merc cavalry is still there. Sons of the Fallen taking fire on the approach. They're not multiple HP anymore, so they can't rely on that to simply absorb all of this arrow fire. You can see there up on the high ground in Nardubawi we've got a very nice arc of fire into the approaching Dwarven infantry, which is definitely going to be taking the brunt of the casualties, but it should allow the elves to get into melee range a little bit more easily. Now the Eastron crossbowmen are coming in. Now that definitely will inflict some pretty hefty casualties on even the Sons of the Fallen. I'm not sure I'd pull them out at this point. You just need to get them into melee and hope the crossbows cannot get a good arc of fire, because you're not going to be able to get them away without them getting shot in the back several times, and that... I mean, once you're sort of committed, sometimes you just need to follow through. Even if the enemy has bamboozled you. Look at all of these arrows coming in. I do worry for the defenders when all of their archers are out of ammunition, especially seeing as they're pouring a lot of fire into this basic Dwarven infantry, which is better than most at standing up to this sort of thing. Now we can see Merc cavalry charging in, but again, melee cavalry only has a charge bonus of 5, so this 3rd Legion is going to massacre them in melee, especially after the damage they've taken. There's also this Hetherley Tower which has moved forward. But yeah, these Corsair archers have been caught out. They've already been firing for quite some time, to be fair, but oof, that Hetherley Tower, unlike the Dwarven infantry, is a good target to go after because they are unshielded and lightly armoured. And then these warriors of Khazad-dûm are obviously just going to dumpster these Corsair archers in the sustained fight. But they've already been firing for quite a while, as I said, so they've probably got the bulk of the kills that they were ever going to get. But even so, it's a bit of a shame to just sort of lose men for basically nothing. Now the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen are firing, which it's going to be it's going to be interesting to see what they actually fire. Are they going to go after the Thranduil? Well, there they go. Oof. I mean, they're actually far enough away to the point where a lot of their sort of flaming splinter shot ammunition won't connect. So obviously they're also very accomplished melee fighters, but actually I would probably have recommended saving it until the dwarves and the elves had bunched up a lot more. Also much more of an opportunity there to go after some of the elites, like the Mithril Guard, because even the strongest unit is not going to enjoy taking a direct shot from the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen. One of the most feared units in the game, for good reason. This is a somewhat disjointed attack and disjointed defence so far, but that's good. It means it won't be one-sided. Thrandramy Erin charging in, but this is a very thick defensive line. Corsair archers routing off and breaking. Some of the heavier Mirkwood units are going to be getting into the front line now, though. And some of that better Mirkwood infantry is going to pay dividends, I think, against something like the Flag Rim. Now we can see more and more dwarves pouring forwards. This might be a situation where I have to hover quite a long way above the battlefield in order to get these sufficient frames. You can see here that the defenders trying to make the most of the huge amount of skirmishes they have. Abrazani Nadubawi with flaming ammunition into that elven blob. I'm actually surprised the Flag Rim are not moving forward to help the Belagaya footmen, because as time goes on, the Belagaya footmen are a pretty good first line, but they're going to need help because they don't have the highest amount of killing power, and against the armour of the dwarves and the skill of the elves, they will start to fall apart. More and more forces coming forward though as we sort of go up on high. You can see now that the Flag Rim are pushing forward, and they will do a decent job against the Dwarven infantry. Less so against the Mirkwood infantry, but needs must. You can see that they are pushing into several places now. Sons of the Fallen coming back after their beating at the hands of the crossbows, and just having a look at the reserves, there honestly isn't that much. I mean, I think the attackers here have seen how the defenders have sort of set their stall out. They're really front-loading their defence, hoping that their skirmishers can do a number on the blobs that form when the attackers crash into the line. They're just sort of hoping that they can crack the defensive line with sheer power. Sentries of Khazad-dûm coming in to back up the elves. I think this is where they stand most chance of breaking through. Sons of the Fallen, several units of highly skilled elves, and the Belagaya footmen over on this side are struggling, and the Flag Rim eventually will do as well. But look at all these arrows flying backwards and forwards. Aradirith Amon Lank, which of course are a unit that can hide, but they've taken a real beating as well, only 42 of them left. Pretty accomplished melee infantry unit as well, with those two-handed axes, AP and melee of course, so both Rune and especially Umbar will have a vested interest in making sure that they don't have any ability to come back. Now the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen have now got a much better target. If they fire into here, that could be a devastating amount of kills, the sort of thing which actually swings this battle in favour of the defenders. But they're targeting the wrong section of the line for me. They're targeting the middle here, which is the thinnest part of the line. And that is a bit of a shame. The Númenórean Lancers are coming forward, but at the wrong time. The 2nd Legion Axe Guard, you don't want to get caught in a sustained fight with them. 2 units of them coming forward. The Khamûl Shadow Guard, so it really is a mess at this point. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen as well. They're going to be throwing their Nafatoon-like projectiles in. It'll be interesting to see how actually the attackers fare as time goes on, because Mirkwood traditionally are not going to be the best at dealing with this sort of attrition-based warfare. Obviously the dwarves are much more up for this sort of thing than the elves are, but Mirkwood, I'm not sure if they've got the numbers to sort of sustain this kind of attack. Especially not when you consider that the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, the crossbowmen, all of the archers are just pouring fire in across the line. I feel as though if the defenders have picked the right targets as the battle has gone on, they stand a decent chance of winning, but based on where some of their units are shooting from, I'm not sure if they have. Maitha Ilaz Gelen firing into the backs of those Nadu Barwood, which are trying to get a surround off on the attacking lines, but they immediately started to break, taking arrow and javelin fire, which is a bit of a shame. I appreciate the idea from the defenders there, trying to envelop the line, trying to wrap up the line, and that would essentially be victory for the defenders. But you can see in several positions along the line, as we sort of turn it down a little bit so my PC doesn't have a heart attack, we can see here that now that the Axe Guard have arrived on scene, that extra AP going to be very key in helping the dwarves in particular push through on this side. You can see the dwarves have lasted under this kind of pressure a little bit better than the elves, although the elves were concentrated on one part of the line specifically. And yeah, the Khamûl Shadow Guard, there's a lot of dwarves here, and I think there are some Gamprim. The Gamprim need to get up onto this front line. I mean, the defenders have committed themselves to trying to make this defensive line work. They're going to need to keep going. They're going to need to persevere, which might not seem like an attractive proposition when you're losing ground to a combined force of Khazad-dûm and Mirkwood, who have got some very intimidating looking units. But once you've put your eggs into the basket, you need to stay there. Corsair infantry is moving forward. That is not going to be of the sufficient quality to stop the dwarves. It's more meat for the grinder, I suppose, but you can see that the defenders still desperately trying to sort of get more skirmish power in there. Abrazani Nadu Tariq will be a bit of a godsend against the dwarves, depending on what goes on. You can see actually that a lot of the skirmishers that are out of ammunition are being committed to the Elven front, presumably because a lot of the decent defensive infantry is AP, and they want to save that for the dwarves. What's going on up here? Do they still have ammunition? They still have their crossbows out. There's some Castamir's Rangers over here, which, again, another unit can hide, of course. That body piercing could potentially be huge, and they need it to be, because slowly but surely the defenders are going to lose ground. You can see the warriors of Khazad-dûm pushing on this side, so now it's the defensive line which looks in danger of being wrapped up. And there's some Thurney Tower, presumably out of ammunition, coming into the fight, so both sides are now sort of committing more and more skirmishers to the fight. But again, the Dragon's Wrath crossbow, I still say they're targeting too far over here. This bunch over here, including the Sons of the Fallen, earlier on in the battle would have been lethal. There are those Dragon's Wrath guildsmen who are taking skirmish fire from somewhere, of course. There are still attacking skirmishers here and there. Mithril Guard have yet to be committed, as have the Legion Bodyguard. But one thing to bear in mind for the defenders as well is as soon as their line falls, the Mirkwood cavalry is going to be right on this, I would imagine, and pouring through the defensive line. The Gamprim are now moving forward, so this is going to be a one-line type of battle. It could have been a much longer fight, actually, if the defenders had decided to stagger their line, but honestly, this is not a wrong way of doing things. It can pay off,
They have lost half their men.
provided you construct your line right and choose the right targets for your ranged units. I'm not sure whether they have. Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen committed to melee, individually of course very strong. There's not very many of them, however, so they will need a bit of help. The Dragon's Wrath guildsmen, I can see in the background there the Roykabin, but they're immediately being targeted and they will fall away pretty quickly. These Dragon's Wrath guildsmen still have some ammunition, which is definitely going to be very important if the defenders are going to have any sort of success here. Myriad mercenaries. I mean, these charges are not really doing a great deal because they're charging into the back of their own men. Those E-strong crossbows are still alive and still have ammunition, and I think the attackers are mostly completely spent in terms of ammo. Legion Bodyguard and the Mithril Guard, however, are going to be a bit of a tricky nut to crack. There are Carmels chosen, but they're not quite in the same league as the best of the Dwarven infantry, unfortunately for the defenders. But here in the middle, actually, the dwarves are pushing in places, but they're also falling apart in others. I mean, the Nar Rim have managed to push through the attacking lines, but this actually means that the cavalry now has a clear charge on the defensive lines, which is unfortunate to say the least. There's more Gamprim coming forward. The Nafatoons, well, I'd say Nafatoons. I'm used to calling projectiles like that Nafatoons, but throwing them in. Ye old grenades, getting some decent damage done. The Legion Bodyguard and the Mithril Guard coming over here to try and add to this section of the line, trying to push through, but I mean, they're immediately going to be targeted by the Dragon's Wrath guildsmen, which will burn through the HP. It won't do huge damage to, well, I say that. Only one of them died in that volley, for example, but they're already bloodied up, and honestly, the Dragon's Wrath guildsmen might not be the most attractive target for the Legion Bodyguard. The sheer melee skill they have is pretty intimidating, and there's those E-strong crossbows ready to fire right into the flank. But the dwarves were having a bit of success over here, and that is continuing. The Sons of the Fallen, backed up by a lot of this second legion over here, slowly but surely making progress against the Gamprim. The Corsair infantry was not enough to stem the tide over here, and slowly but surely the dwarves, I think they're going to win this battle for the attackers. If we have a look at the, well, I don't know. The attackers have lost more men, but as we've learnt in the past, the attackers tend to really pull it back in the late game. Abrazani Nadubawi coming in. But again, the dwarves won't be too worried about that with their armour and shields. Over here, I think this is where the defensive line is going to really start to struggle. Up here, on the other hand, the Gamprim getting into a nice position. There's also the Narun Aru Royal Guard, who are now spent on ammo. I think everyone has expended most of their ammo except that one unit of Nadubawi. And now there's another multiple HP unit over here, the Narun Aru Royal Guard, coming in to try and stop the Legion Bodyguard, but Dragon's Wrath crossbows doing their best. There are those Dragon's Wrath guildsmen as well, and the Castamir's Rangers still firing away. But I actually think the armour of the dwarves here might have proven to be a really, really key thing. If it were two elves here, for example, those Rangers possibly would have ripped through the entire line, and it is primarily dwarves that are left. Most of the elves of Mirkwood are long dead. There are still a few individuals there, like that one here Lung, but he probably won't last too much longer. Ooh, a rear charge there from the Númenórean Lancers, so Umbar getting in behind the line successfully. The Roykabin Amon Lank being targeted down by the Nadubawi, but I don't think it's going to be enough to save the Númenórean Lancers, especially not with the Nun wave present. So a bit of a limp-wristed rear charge, to be honest with you. The Mithril Guards standing up very well to it. Castamir's Rangers now out of ammunition, so they're having to be committed to melee. Well, the Carmel's Chosen, I mean, the middle fell apart for the attackers, which has led to the defenders be the one able to rear charge things. So the Carmel's Chosen coming in here to take on the Mithril Guard. The AP of the Mithril Guard should stand them in good stead here, but it's more pressure that the dwarves are having to absorb, and there's a lot of AP around them with those halberds and the crossbows that still have ammunition. That chanting, inspiring the troops around them, but this might be where the defenders lose it, honestly, because there isn't enough halberds here to keep this line going forever, and I think these Nadubawi were actually just being chucked in to try and hold the, well, stem the tide here as the dwarves continue to push. The 2nd Legion Axe Guard presumably have got quite a lot of kills at this point because they've lasted a long time. What is going on back here? Aradirith, I think they caught up to the Númenórean Lancers. I mean, the Númenórean Lancers are doing their best to escape the Mirkwood Cavalry, and they've done a good job of it so far, so that's good Cav micro. They're actually going to charge into the Maetha Ilaz Gelen. Probably the, other than the cavalry, the one elven unit which seems to be left, which could have a bearing on the outcome of this fight, but that wasn't the best charge. None of them really died from it, and those javelins could yet prove to be a real difference maker. But the defenders are going to win over here. Carmel's Chosen defeat seems certain for them, but with all of these halberds, the Mithril Guard shouldn't really have the ability to take on this much defending infantry, and I think seeing that, the Carmel's Chosen are going to try and surround and finish off the Sons of the Fallen. Also going to try and deal with the Mirkwood Cavalry, because if that gets in behind the lines and starts rear charging, it's basically all over. The dwarves acting as the very sturdy anvil. Castamir's Rangers, I mean, those Narun Arurul Guard are trying to hold their line, but the Legion Bodyguard, just a much better infantry killing machine. Of course, the infantry malice not really helping our Farazon's unit over here as he takes on Barlin. No generals are dead yet, though. Touch wood. I'm sure that'll happen very soon with all of the generals' bodyguard units up to their necks in it at this point. But yeah, I think the attackers are going to be okay. I think the dwarves, their elite units are just tying up so much of the defensive line, and a lot of what they've got over here, if you look over there, Abrazani Nadubawi, that's not going to be enough to stop 2nd Legion and Sons of the Fallen. And there's still going to be that pesky cavalry, which is actually being pursued by Abrazani Nadutari. Definitely not worth it. But they are going after the Maetha Ilaz Gelen, which is much more worth it, stopping those javelins, although I think at this point it's going to be all over relatively soon. They're trying to use their ranged firepower to make something happen, but they just don't have the killing power to get through all of these heavily armoured dwarves anymore. The crossbows, of course, very low on men. They still have ammunition, which is good for them. This Legion Bodyguard has really tanked out a lot of damage. So the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, their melee skill is all well and good, but they didn't have the AP themselves to get through the thick outer shell of the Legion Bodyguard. And look at the Mithril Guard here, still tanking it out. Defeat does seem certain now that the Gamprim have sort of got their halberds down and keeping them at arm's length. But really, I mean, carnage here. Cagey opening, a little bit of cavalry probing, bit of an extended skirmish phase, and then right into business here. The defenders and the attackers, this was the hill they chose to die on. And die they did, the defenders, unfortunately. The dwarven power was simply too much for them, and this actually showcases Khazad-dûm's strength really nicely. Their ability to just tank out so much damage and so much pressure from the defenders, but also I feel as though the defending army compositions being as skirmish heavy as they were was probably a little bit of a mistake. I think one of Rune or Umbar, probably Rune more so, should have gone a little bit more infantry heavy. Purely because, you know, they didn't have the amount of infantry necessary to kill the dwarves.
Let the crows have his miserable bones, and let our swords have his men.
Well, our Farazon is the first general to fall. But yeah, I mean, Umbar technically have got better individual units of infantry, but I feel as though their skirmishers would have been very useful in tackling Mirkwood skirmishers, which when the defenders utilised their defensive position, Mirkwood skirmishers started to fall off in terms of how effective they were. And in the end, that early sort of wasted cavalry might well have affected more than I thought initially, because those Dragon Knights in the late game would have been very difficult to stop. Only really the Elven Javelins would have been sufficient to do that. Those Abrazanim are still shooting away, but they're not going to have enough. I mean, their whole thing is being very, very durable in a skirmish fight, not dealing out huge amounts of damage, which means they're not really going to have the best time in melee, especially against a unit of 2nd Legion. Their armour is something they are very proud of as a unit, and the Axe Guard are going to be too much for them. Yeah, very well played to Khazad-dûm, and it also demonstrates that the Elves of Mirkwood, you know, even with their more durable units, if they're focused down by a lot of enemy skirmishers of varying types, they are not going to have as much staying power as the dwarves. I mean, that sounds obvious, it's basically the two ends of the spectrum, but this one really demonstrates the difference between the two. The Elves of Mirkwood may have gotten a lot of kills, we'll see at the end, but ultimately they didn't have the staying power in a fight like this to really be effective. Would have been interesting to see if they went even more skirmish heavy than they did, but I feel as though that would have played right into Rune and Umbar's hands with the armies they picked. And in the end, Khazad-dûm able to pull it out of the bag. I mean, I think this is going to be the final vestiges over here. Is this the general? I'm not sure. He looks fairly unique, but I'm sure the runic general, unless they changed it, which is entirely possible. One Carmel's chosen. He shouldn't last too much longer. He gets another kill, which is good for him, but there are axemen all around him. That AP is surely going to pay dividends very, very shortly. And I know this isn't Carmul, because Carmul is the Horned Nazgul, which is in several of the Carmul's units, so 2 variants of him may well be dead in this huge pile of bodies.
The battle is very much
E-strong crossbowmen, they're going to break off.
Victory will be ours.
Their general's actually going to remain in the fight longer than the crossbows, which is interesting. There he goes, it is the general.
Enemy general lies dead. We have set the cart to hell.
And that is going to be it. So, victory for the attackers.
It could have been us that were slain and defeated on the field, but fate has been kind to us and delivered us victory.
Well then, let's see the stats. And yet, Khazad-dûm really helping his team there. Obviously, Mirkwood not getting as much kills, but it's not really too surprising. I mean, Mirkwood are not going to be the sort of faction which can engage in this sort of warfare and expect to get the sort of kills that you would usually associate with the elves up against the evil men. But Khazad-dûm doing really, really well. They're managing to weather that storm of arrows, crossbow bolts and other projectiles, fiery projectiles even, that were thrown their way. Both the defenders doing about the same, but then that's also not too surprising because both of them brought very similar types of armies, with Umbar maybe going a little bit more for the rangers and the armoured archers, and then Rune going a little bit more for their crossbows and sort of specialty skirmishers, and obviously Umbar with a few more spears, Rune with a little bit more in terms of their AP infantry, but very, very close, very, very similar. But yeah, Khazad-dûm obviously MVP this time around. Having a look at some of his kills, 377 on that unit of 2nd Legion. Yeah, these guys were the MVPs. And this really goes to show that if you can get Dwarven infantry like this into sustained melee, even under basic arrow fire, they will perform very, very well against the right kind of units. And Umbar and Rune, obviously front-loading with their most heavily armoured units, meant that the two-handed axes from the 2nd Legion able to get tons and tons of kills. And over on that side of the battlefield there, where the cursor is, that was where the 2nd Legion did their work, and ultimately where the defenders made it unwinnable. No, the attackers made it unwinnable for the defenders. So used to the evil men being on the attack in this sort of setup of factions. Warriors of Khazad-dûm were the first line in, and as such they suffered pretty heavily. The Orc Hunters getting a decent amount of kills, only 1 unit of skirmishers. So yeah, you can see how infantry heavy Khazad-dûm went, and with how skirmish heavy the defenders were, they were never really going to last all that long on the part of the battlefield that they chose to defend most earnestly. I think maybe if they went for a little bit more of a trying to use the hills a bit more, maybe trying to use the choke points, they would have had a little bit more success. And obviously wiser use of the cavalry may have made a big difference, because obviously cavalry can vary drastically from battle to battle in how effectively it's used. And here, unfortunately, that was the thing I think that Mirkwood did that was most important to the battle. They shut down that first sort of probing cavalry assault from the defenders very, very well, and ultimately that meant the dwarves could go about their work without too much fear of being rear-charged. So yeah, that was actually a very fun battle. I'm actually a little bit disappointed that we didn't get to see the higher bit of the settlement there, or the narrow bit of the canyon, but I suppose it is a 2v2. If this was something like a 3v3, for example, that might well have worked out very differently. But still, nice to see a new map. Big thanks to me at Yule for sending me this battle replay. I enjoyed it greatly. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.